For our next installment of Media Arts with Mr. V, we're completing a practice exercise towards a larger unit here. We're going to learn about value and how it relates to color, and how artists can use value to make something look believably 3D and round. We're going to do this obviously through the realm of digital here, being media arts. So let's get into it. Value can be represented on a scale here. This one goes from 0 or 1 to 10, 1 being or 0 being the lightest, whitest, and 10 being the blackest black there is. And then it's just segmented evenly between that to distinguish the different tones. Artists are always constantly thinking about value. One example here, famous photographer Ansel Adams. In this image, this one from the textbook, he's breaking down the value into bands in the picture. He's intentionally has almost like dark, light, dark, light, dark, light, going back like in a pattern to draw your eye and have a repetition or almost a visual rhythm to the way that, to the composition of the artwork. Again here, another example from the textbook, if we look at this artwork, where is the lightest value? What would we say the light source is in the image? Well, if we look carefully, the light source you would say is almost coming from the child's head, but it's actually a candle if you look carefully behind the woman's hand. She's using her hand like a reflector to project light onto the baby, and the artist is using value very intentionally in this artwork because the way it works is you look at the baby, you notice the woman's shirt being one of the lightest things in the image, which then guides your eye up to her face. Her stare then directs you over to the other figure on the right, and her stare and also her value, being that their skin is one of the lightest things in the image and their faces, then directs you back down. So there's almost a triangular or circular thing that's happening in this composition. You start with the infant and you go to the left, up and around and back again. To study value and how to create value in art, artists typically study the cube, cone, cylinder, and sphere, and the reason for this is that these are the basic forms that almost all things are made out of, either natural or man-made. If you think about it, right, most things are made out of these shapes. So your head, for instance, a human head, is kind of like a sphere, but it kind of also has a front and a back and sides like a cube. So it's kind of a hybrid between the two. A tree is kind of like a series of cylinders strung together, bigger and smaller. Traditional exercise here, if you've ever taken painting or drawing class, you've probably drawn these forms before and seen how light hits them and how to illustrate them. So we're going to do this, but on the computer, and also bring in the element of color into our exercise. First, before we do that, we're going to learn about the parts of light and why is this important to how you portray a 3D object. Looking at the sphere here, you have on the sphere, the darkest dark is what's called the core shadow. So the core shadow is this kind of crescent shaped dark area, and it's going to be the darkest thing on the sphere itself. Then you have your regular shadow, and you're transitioning to the light as you move to the left and up. The highlight is going to be the lightest area where the light is the most intense, and that's going to be your area where it's very small, and that's going to be where you use sparingly that either 1 or 0, that lightest value, to kind of show the highlight or where the light is most intense on the object. Two other very important areas. The cast shadow is the shadow that is cast by the object. This is important to make your object feel like it's attached to a surface or a ground, a table if you will. So the object blocks the light and casts a shadow onto the table or the whatever the surface is, and that's going to be where you're going to use one of your darkest values, probably the 9 or 10. However, inside of the shadow, you can have what's called reflected light. So a little bit of light is coming down, hitting the table, and then is reflected back into the object. So notice inside of the shadow on the object, you have reflected light. And sometimes you will see reflected light in also the cast shadow. For the exercise I mentioned, we're going to use this template here to work on top of. And I have instructions at the top what we're going to paint each of the forms to look like. So it's going to be a red sphere, a blue cube, a yellow cylinder, and we're going to get a little bit creative on the last one and create a cone where the light has a warm tone to it and the cool tone, and then a cool tone to the shadows, to show you how, as long as you put the parts of light in the correct location, it will look believable and round. To show you an example of what this looks like as a finished product, here's the sphere, cube, cylinder, and cone, red, blue, yellow, and warm and cool. So let's get to it. In order to do this, we're going to first download this from the Google Classroom. So close this out. Open in a new window. Download. Open this document in Photoshop. I now have our document here all set up. However, before we do any work on this, what I want to do is show you how we can set up our Wacom tablet here to do what we want. So if we go here, type in Wacom or Wacom, that is the name of the tablet manufacturer, and you're going to want to click on the icon that is the black one here to set up tablet properties. If you get an error message, sometimes you have to unplug it and replug it. Plug back in my tablet here, and I got to where I need to be. Tablet properties, I'm going to click Photoshop, since we're using Photoshop for this exercise. I'm going to tell it what I want the buttons to do basically on the tablet. This is helpful because it'll really make your workflow way more efficient. So typically what I like to have here is I like to have a zoom in and out feature. So if I go right here, keystroke, keyboard, keystroke, Control and plus is the shortcut for zoom in. It looks like Control equals because they share a character on the keyboard, but you just want to press Control plus, hit OK. Zoom out is Control minus, so I'm going to go here. Control minus is zoom out. On the other side, we know undo is Control Z. So Control Z will let me quickly undo any mistakes that I make as I work. And then this one, doesn't really matter what you set this one to. Sometimes I just do B for brush. You could do E for eraser. Switch back and forth. One really helpful tip here, you want to go to pen. And here I want to be able to adjust the size of my brush. So the shortcut for the brush size adjustment is the bracket keys on the keyboard. They're right here kind of next to the letter P. So left bracket will make the brush smaller. I can put that here if I want to label what it is. Brush smaller. Set the other one to make it larger. Okay, everything should be set up now for Photoshop, so I'm going to dive into it. Here's my document that I downloaded before. One thing I want to do before I start is just lock all of the layers so I don't accidentally paint on them. I always want to have a new layer that I'm going to work on top of. So I'm just going to go here, lock all of the layers, and make a new one on top, which I'll call paint. Zoom in a little bit. And let's try out the brushes that I was talking about. Right now I have a black color. I like to check these two buttons. One is pressure for opacity and one is pressure for size. And what that means is, oh, my brush is huge. Let's see. Bring it down a little bit. If I hover over, I'm hovering the pen over the pad and just clicking on the little buttons on the pen to make the brush much smaller. The harder I push, the darker it'll be. And the lighter I push, the lighter opacity the brush will be. Also notice it's thicker as I press down harder and thinner as I release, and that's the pressure for size. So that's what I want. I can use my shortcut keys undo to undo what I did. Now we know our sphere is going to be red. So let me get my sphere where I need it to be. We'll start with red, and we want something pretty dark, something that's going to be in that 9 region maybe. And again, we're working on a new layer on top here. This is where we're going to put our core shadow, our darkest dark. So notice how that corresponds with the value underneath. That we're using the underdrawing to kind of guide what we're doing and matching the color. Okay. We're going to work our way into the light. This seems kind of counterintuitive, but what happens here is actually this is going to be pure red here in the light. Something very close to pure red. And then as we go towards the brightest part of the light and the highlight, we're going to be mixing white into our color. So I'm going to now steadily move this way on my color picker, little jumps at a time here. Notice I have a nice soft brush here. So in the brushes, you want your hardness down. That just means you won't have a very hard edge. It'll be hard to blend together. Okay, we're getting somewhere here. Again, that highlight is a very small area. That's where you reserve that last little 1 or 0 shiny little part, right? I'm going to go backwards now and go back into the shadow here. So let me go pick a color, something I'm going to want a pretty dark red for our shadow area. Maybe even darker than that a little bit. We're getting somewhere here. Our cast shadow, the shadow that's cast onto the table or surface. Now, looking at this, it's sort of looking around, right? But what's going to make it more believable is the reflected light, right? So what that means is light coming off, the light's coming this direction, right? It's hitting the ball, but it's also going past, hitting the table, and is being reflected back in to the sphere. This, just by adding this little bit, it starts to make it look more believably round. The other thing that happens is light is also reflected in to the core shadow here as well. Back, or sorry, the yes, the cast shadow. I can use I can use the erase. I like to take a hard eraser and just go back and clean it up. Oh, what do we got here? Here we go. And that's a pretty nice little sphere right there. The other thing that happens as light goes closer to the source here, it has a warmth to it. So the other thing I could do is go a little bit more orange or yellow. Oops. Almost forgot to go back to my brush. Bring in a little bit of warmth. In the light areas. And you'll see how that just changes things a little bit. So right there, we're starting to play with the idea of the temperature of the light there, meaning is it warm, is it cool? Jumping to the next two forms, what we want to do here on the blue cube and the yellow cylinder is start again with the core shadow. So the darkest dark on the object here on the cube. This is the core shadow, going to be something close to black with blue in it. You have the shadow. Then you have your light that starts with pure blue working, and then you're going to make tints, meaning mixing white with blue until you get to the highlight almost white. On the cylinder, yellow with black. Sometimes I like to go more towards green because yellow with black is kind of an ugly color. And that's your core shadow. The shadow, pure yellow, yellow mixed with white, making tints until you get to almost white. Again, don't forget the little bit of reflected light coming in. That's what makes things look believably round. I want to jump ahead here to the warm and cool cone to show you that it really is all about the value. The color can sometimes almost be arbitrary in the colors that you choose, but in this case, where the value is what's most important, that does the color correspond to the correct value in its placement. So let's jump back to Photoshop here. Scroll on down to my cone. Something like this, we just want to pick a cool color. So it could be, cool colors are anything from, it could be violet, it could be blue, it could be green. Go with a dark blue maybe. This is our core shadow, the darkest dark. as I move into the shadow, I'll go with a slightly different blue. As we round over this direction, we're going to get up to pure color. So this is where I want to transition to something warmer. So I'm going to go yellow-green, and then I'm going to go more yellow. In the light. As you can see, your brain still reads it as being all one thing, even though it's kind of different colors. Let's go back and get some reflected light over here. Be a little lighter. And our cast shadow. Clean it up with the eraser. Not bad. Again, in the end here, we're shooting for smooth transitions and for really trying to match the value that you see with the color on top. You want to have the light coming from the top left there. You want to make sure all your parts of light are in the right area, including, don't forget, that reflected light to really make your forms look believable and round. So good luck. Let me know what questions you have.